Hey everybody, welcome to Mammoth Interactive's YouTube channel. First of all, I want to thank you for watching this video. And remember that this channel doesn't do Patreon. Instead, we sell our digital courses down below. And every single dollar that we get from the products you buy below goes into making more content. The best way to help out this channel and Mammoth Interactive is to subscribe to Mammoth Interactive's huge library of content. Get thousands of hours and hundreds of courses for a low price down below. We have a monthly option and a yearly option. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the video.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to our course. In this lecture, we're starting our project of building a greeting application. Our first step is going to be to create the application. So open Xcode and select Create New Project. Then we're going to choose a template for our project. The template will be a regular iOS application. So make sure you have iOS selected and then app. We won't need any framework or library. Okay, then press next, and here you can enter a product name. Let's call this our greeting, and the app is implied. Okay, then here you can choose a team, an organization identifier, which is just your website name backward. And the interface will be Swiftui, so pay attention to that. Swift user interface, and the language Swift. We don't need core data or tests for now. Okay, then we are going to press next, and that is going to prompt us to choose a location where to save the project. Then you can hit create and the app will be launched. So here is our project in Xcode. You have a lot of different tabs open, but you can at any point hide the sidebars with this sidebar icon. So our left sidebar is going to contain by default the file hierarchy, where we have all of our files. These are files created with every Xcode project, specifically in this case for an iOS app with the Swiftui as the framework. Then we have other icons that we can open as well for things like error messages and other steps of the project that appear as you build or run the project. Then we have the code itself. We can hide that left sidebar to more easily see the code. Just give that a moment. You can press on that to hide it. There we go. And here we have the code. You can zoom in on the code at any time with Command plus or Command minus to zoom out. So here we have our file for the content view. You also have this preview for any view struct. So this allows you to quickly preview what the element would look like. So in this case, we have some text that says hello world. You can zoom in to see this. You can zoom in at any point with using command and using then your mouse scroller to just scroll in or out. Okay, so here we have the text hello world. We could change this to say something like hi. Okay, and that will adjust in the preview. Sometimes you have to refresh the preview or save your code or wait a little bit for the preview to update. Okay, so there we have a preview, and that is created by the previews struct in this file. On the right sidebar, we have some more features, like we have some data information about the file. We have other icons as well that you can open that may or may not have content depending on what you're currently doing. Okay, and you can hide that right sidebar anytime just by pressing that icon to hide it. There we go. Now it is gone. You can zoom into the app using the plus and minus keys at the bottom of your Xcode project here. Okay, so that is how you can create a new Swiftui Xcode application. Some things to be aware of are the compiler type for the deployment of the app. So go to your file hierarchy and select the application, this top level file. Here, go into the general information, and you want to make sure that your deployment is iOS 15, because that is what we're using for this course. That means that the project, the files, they will run on iOS 15. So that is the iOS we're building for. If you try to run it on a phone that doesn't have iOS 15, then the project likely will break. Okay, because we're building for iOS 15, the latest version right now. And when you do preview your application, you can select at the top here of your Xcode interface, you can select what you want to use for the preview, whether for the preview of a view, as we saw before with the content view, we could see a preview right here. That's one way to preview the app. Another way to preview the app is via the simulator, just by hitting the run button at the top here. And you can change what you're using for the preview. So you could use an actual device if you connect it to your computer. You can build as well. Then at the bottom, you can choose from a bunch of other devices like iPads or iPods or iPhones. I'm going to choose iPhone 13 Pro, then refresh my preview. Okay, and the type of device will adjust in this preview here after a moment. Okay, so you can select what you want to preview the app on. Okay, so that is how you can create a new iOS app. Join me coming up in our next lecture. We're going to get started modifying the app. We're going to first learn how to show the current time in the app. Hello everyone and welcome back to our course. In our previous lecture, we created a new project with Xcode. In this lecture, we are going to learn how we can modify the app to show the current time. First, I am going to increase the size of my text to make it easier for you to see. So on my text object here in the content view Swift file, I am going to grab the text object and add to it a font property. I'm going to use the system font and set its size to 70. That is going to increase the size of that text that appears here inside of my preview. Okay, and you can even change it to 100 or whatever you'd like to make it easier to see. Okay. Now let's change that high instead to say the current time. So for that, I am going to build out a function to help me here. So inside of my body, I am going to first create a variable that says the current time. So it's called the current time. And I'm going to use a function called getCurrentTime. This is a function I'll have to create myself. Then instead of showing the text hi, I'm going to show the current time. So I will actually pass in the current time variable like so. Now currently we have no preview because we need to build this function getCurrentTime. If I want to actually be able to use it, I have to build that helper function. So we can just put the helper function into this file. It doesn't have to be inside of the struct. It could just be inside of the file. So let's create a function called getCurrentTime. That is the function name and it takes in no parameters, but it could take in parameters if you wanted to in these parentheses. Okay, and this function is going to return a string. So it's going to store a string. And here we can use this arrow, which is just a dash and an alligator bracket or a greater than sign. And the type it's going to return is string. So that's how we can specify the type it returns. Then we open up the function body with curly brackets. Then we can already return something here. We can just return time just to test this out. Now we can save the file with Command S or just file save if you want to recompile, and you can refresh the preview. Now the preview can take a bit of time to refresh the first time that you make a big change, so just be patient here as it updates. So here we're going to create a variable called current time, and we're going to call the function getCurrentTime, which returns a string. Then we can show that in the preview. So let's just refresh our preview and wait for it to load. Okay, there we go. So you sometimes have to refresh the preview a couple times. If it's not showing you any error message, then you would see an error message in the code, or you would see an error message up here in the top of Xcode. But if it's not showing you that, then it just means you have to refresh the preview. And also if you fix an error message but it doesn't seem to change anything, then just save the file and keep refreshing the preview. You could even run the app as well. Okay, so now we can see we have time appearing here, but we just have the text time. How do we actually show the current time? Like if it was 10 a.m., how would we show that? Well, we're not just going to return a literal string like this. We're going to return the time. So we can use Swiftui features and functionality to get the time. First, I'm going to create a variable called formatter and use the date formatter object. Okay, then I am going to create a variable called the date string, and I am going to here take my formatter and convert to a string from the current date. So if when you call the date object like this, when you create a date object, you get the current date, and the current date actually includes the time. So we're taking the current date, which includes the time, and we're formatting it into a string with the date formatter. So the date formatter just takes a date object and formats it into a string because we want to return the string data type. You'll get this warning that we never actually use date string currently. So we're going to return the date string. That will remove the warning. Okay, then just wait a moment here. You can save the file and you can refresh your preview. Just wait a few seconds here. You see the warning disappears. Then we can wait for the preview to update as well. Currently, we see nothing in the preview because for this formatter, we actually have to specify the time style. So I'm going to take my formatter variable and I'm going to set time style to equal .short. Okay, that is going to display for me the time now, 11:06 a.m., my current time. You could also use .long. Okay, and wait a moment here, and now it shows you 11:06:41 a.m. PDT. So it tells me the hour, the minute, the second, then we have AM, and then my Pacific time. So this tells me the time zone as well. All right, so you have to set the time style if you want to actually show the time. And notice here, we don't actually see the date, so it's a bit confusing, but the date formatter here is actually for the time if you convert it to a string. It's not called the time formatter. All right, so there we go. Now we're able to show the current time in our app, 11:07 a.m. That is the current time. All right, now, what if we wanted to here show the current hour? Because we're going to be choosing a greeting based on the current hour in military time. So if it is currently 11 a.m., I'm going to show good morning. If it's 11 p.m., I'm going to show good evening. So I need to convert this time to military time and then get the current hour. And because that way, instead of checking for 11 a.m. versus 11 p.m., I can just check for 11 versus 23 because 23 is 11 p.m. in military time. So in the next lecture, we're going to learn how we can display the current hour in military time. Hello everyone and welcome back to our course. In our previous lecture, we learned how to show the current time in a Swift app with Swiftui. In this lecture, we're going to learn how we can get the current hour in military time because we are going to show a different greeting based on what hour it is in military time. Is it 11 or is it 23, which is 11 a.m. versus 11 p.m. Military time makes it easy for us to know if it's morning, afternoon, or evening, or night. Okay, so instead of using a function to get the current time, I am going to show the current hour. Okay, so I could completely remove this or I could keep it and just add on to it here. Let's add another piece of text that says the current hour. And now, if you want to use two objects, two elements, you have to actually put them into a group because otherwise it will show up on two different pages, the two objects. So what I will do is I am going to create a vertical stack, meaning it will put the two elements one above the other. All right, I'll paste those two text objects into the vertical stack. So the two objects are now stacked vertically. And I'm going to move the font to be on top of the vertical stack, which means that it will format both of my text objects at once instead of just formatting one of them. And I can reduce that font size a little bit. Great, okay, so now I have here the time and then I have the current hour and it's prompting me to put in some hour. So how do I get the current hour? Well, I'm going to create a variable and we'll call it the current hour and we'll create a function called getCurrentHour. Okay, then inside of another text object, we'll actually show the current hour. Okay, and here we now have to create that function get current hour. Otherwise, we'll get this error message. So let's create the function. We'll create a function with the keyword func, and then the name is get current hour. The function doesn't take in any arguments, but it is going to return for me a string. And here I'm going to use curly brackets to open up the body of the function. And here we could already return some hour like 0. Okay, that would be in military time, midnight. So let's refresh the preview and we'll be able to see now we'll actually have 0 appear in our third text object. Just give it a moment to update. Okay, so now we have 3 text objects. We have the current time, the current hour as a literal string, and then the variable current hour. It can take a moment for this to update, so just keep refreshing the preview and look, there you go. Now we have current hour is 0. Okay, and there we go. So we can see that the current hour is 0 because we're returning a literal string 0. But I don't want to return a literal string here, 0. I want to instead be able to use Swiftui to get my current hour. So what I'm going to do is use the calendar object from Swiftui and use .current. Then I'm going to grab the date components from that and grab the hour and the minute. Okay, and you don't really need the minute if you're not going to use it, so you could just use the hour. But you do have options to get the hour, the minute, and the seconds. We want them from the current date, which is the current time. Okay, and those are going to be stored in components. So let's just create this variable called components. Okay, and let's see, from here we have from the date. Okay, just wait a moment and the error messages will disappear. Then we get a warning that we're not using the variable, so let's put it to use. What I want to do is get the current hour, and to do that I grab the components and then I can grab the hour from it. Okay, then I can return the current hour. Right, so we are using the calendar object to get the current date and from it just the hour component, and then we're accessing that hour component and we are going to get it. Now you'll get this message that we cannot return, cannot convert an optional integer to a type string. So what we have to do is actually wrap the current hour in a string, because otherwise its data type is an integer. And it's an optional integer because it has this question mark at the end of it. So that means it may or may not get a value. Okay, so here we're returning a string of the current hour. Just save the file and refresh the preview and your error message will disappear. Let's see, just going to wait a moment. No exact matches in call to initializer. So what we have to add here, one more thing is, because components.hour is optional, that means it may or may not have a value. So we actually have to add these 2 question marks and then a 0, meaning that if we were not able to fetch the current hour, if there was some kind of problem, then we'll just return 0. Okay, so you have to add this if you have an optional variable, an optional integer, which means that it may or may not have a value returned. So this is just required due to the way that the calendar is set up. Okay, so now look at that. Now our preview works. Okay, now we have 11:16 a.m., current hour 11. So we know that the current hour is indeed 11 because we can see the time right there. Okay, so that is how we can get the current hour in military time. Okay, and we can put more padding or spacing around our objects. You can see in our vertical stack we have 1 padding around that text item, but if you want to just apply spacing on all the items, then you can put a spacing parameter to the vertical stack like 50. So that will put 50 units of spacing around each element in the vertical stack. Okay, so there we go. That is what the preview looks like now. The time, the current hour, 11. Okay, great. So now we were able to get the current hour in military time. So coming up in our next lecture, we're going to learn how we can choose a greeting to display based on the current hour. So if it is, for example, 11 a.m., we can show good morning. If it is 2 p.m., we can show good afternoon. If it's 7 p.m., we can show good evening. So we can show different greetings based on what time it is currently in your user's time. So this is all going to be different per user. Whatever the time is for your user, they will see appear. So join me in our next lecture where we will continue the project. Hello everyone and welcome back to our course. Previously, we learned how we can get the current hour in military time to display on our app. In this lecture, we are going to learn how we can display a greeting based on the current hour. So here I'm going to replace the text that shows the current hour instead with some greeting like hello. Okay, and then we're going to replace this shortly with something else. So depending on what time it is, we'll show good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. So I'm going to create a variable called the greeting, and I'll create a function called choose greeting. Here we should pass in the current hour. So let's bring back in get current hour, which we could store as a variable. We could create again here the current hour by calling get current hour and then passing in the variable, or we could just call the function directly in there. Okay, then instead of showing hello, I'm going to show the greeting. Now for this to work, I do have to create this function called choose greeting, which takes in a parameter of a current hour. And as well, this current hour, I want to change it to be an integer. So instead of returning a string, the function get current hour should just return the integer, because otherwise I won't be able to check the value of the string as easily as I can check the value of an integer. Now let's create our function. Okay, let's create the func of choose greeting. Okay, so let's open up the parentheses for the arguments and the curly brackets for the body of the function. Now, inside of choose greeting, we need to specify the hour because we need to pass in some kind of argument here, like the current hour or just a. You should keep this descriptive. So we have to pass in an hour because we already did when we called the function, but also because we need some hour in order to be able to choose a greeting. So when you call choose greeting, you actually have to specify the name of the parameter, which is hour, then the colon, then the value that you're sending to the parameter. So we're going to be sending the function the value of the current hour. Okay, now we could already return some integer, but we have to specify that the function is going to return an integer or a string. In this case, we're going to return a string because it's a greeting. Let's just test this out by returning hi for now. Okay, then just fix the indentation and then resume the preview. So I'm going to reload the preview and we should see right now just hi, because we're going to be sending the current hour to a function called choose greeting, and choose greeting just returns hi right now. Okay, and let's just reload the preview. Sometimes it can take a little bit of time for the preview to load. Okay, there we go. Now in our app we see hi instead of hello. Okay, but instead of just showing hi, I want to actually choose a greeting depending on the time it is. So let's say it's morning time, right? Then let's check if it's morning time. To do that, we'll take the hour and we'll check if it's greater than 0 to start off. So here we're using an if statement to check if the value of hour is greater than 0. And 0 represents midnight. So I'm going to create a constant called midnight and set it to equal 0 just to make it more clear what the 0 means. You should try to turn numbers into constants or variables wherever possible. So if the hour is midnight, then let's return. If the hour is greater than midnight, then let's return good morning. Okay, so there we go. Now we can see inside of our app we have good morning. So this if statement is going to check the condition that it has. In this case, hour is greater than midnight. If the condition passes as true, then the if statement's body will be executed. If the if statement's condition passes as false, the body will be skipped over, and we'll go into this return statement right here that says return hi instead. Okay, so let's change this up a bit and check if the hour is less than midnight, then return good morning. Now we actually get hi in the app because the current hour is 11 a.m. We can see that up here. The current hour is not less than midnight. So therefore, this if statement's body was skipped over and we went into hi instead. So here we want to check if the hour is greater than midnight, we'll return good morning. But we also want to check that it is before noon. So let's create here a constant noon and set that to 12. because that is noon in military time. Then we're going to use and here to add a second condition that must be true for the if statement's body to be executed. So let's say that the hour must be also less than noon. So the if statement's body will now only execute if the hour is greater than midnight and the hour is less than noon. If the hour is greater than midnight but the hour is not less than noon, then the if statement's body will not be executed. So here we've added two conditions to the header of the if statement. So now both conditions must pass because of this and. We'll return good morning. And we see good morning because currently it's 11, which means that it is greater than midnight and it is less than noon. It's currently 11:33, okay, as you can see right there. Okay, otherwise we would return hi because that is what we have down here. So if the if statement's condition passes as false, we'll skip over its body and go into the rest of the code after the if statement. We can check this out. Let's say we want to check if the hour is greater than midnight and if the hour is greater than noon. Well, now we see hi because now the if statement's condition passes as false. It's currently 11, which means that it is greater than midnight, but it is not greater than noon. So we see hi instead of good morning. So let's put that back as it was, checking if the hour is greater than midnight and the hour is greater than noon. This means we should return good morning. What if we want to return good afternoon? Well, we can actually add an else if statement chained to the if statement. So this is going to run if the first if statement's condition passes as false. So if the if statement's condition passes as false, we'll go into its chain. If the first if statement's condition passes as true, we will ignore the rest of the chain. So this is how you can chain if statements together. Here we're going to have a condition for our second if statement, our else if statement. We'll check if the hour is greater than or equal to noon. So if the hour is greater than or equal to noon, it means we should return good afternoon. So here we'll return good afternoon. Because if the current hour is, for example, 13, that means it will be greater than or equal to noon, which means you should return good afternoon. This is all military time, by the way. So we're using military time to be able to easily check, is it morning, is it afternoon, is it evening? Okay, so here we have a check for is it morning, is it afternoon? What about evening? Well, we can add here another else if statement to check for evening. So here we can check if it's evening by checking if the hour is greater than or equal to some evening start. So we would have to create here a constant called evening start. Perhaps the evening starts at 5 p.m. Okay, so in that case, we'd also have to append an and to our here second if statement. We'd have to check here if the hour is also less than evening start. Okay, so to say good afternoon, we are going to make sure that the hour is greater than or equal to noon, but that the hour is also less than evening start. If the hour is greater than or equal to evening start, then we can return good evening. Okay, and we here could also add here that the hour has to be less than or equal to midnight, but that's not actually required because this else if statement is the last in the chain. So we don't actually have to check that because it's the only last remaining option that we have in our case. We could also show good night if we wanted to go further into the night. Now this else if statement is actually not even required at all because if it's the last possible condition, you can use what's known as an else statement and just return good evening. So that means we'll check if it's morning, we'll check if it's afternoon, but if it's not morning and it's not afternoon, well, using logic, it must be evening. Okay? If it's not A, it's not B, then it must be C. What else could it be? Okay? And one thing even, we can cut this code down even more, and that's the magic, is we don't actually even need this else statement. We could just return good evening, and we have to remove the return hi now as well, because a return statement is the last thing that will ever happen in a function. Then the function will exit as soon as it reaches one return statement. So we actually don't even need the else statement because if the condition of the first if statement is false and the condition of the second if statement is false, then we'll just exit the chain and we'll go to the next line of code, which is just return good evening. So we don't even need that else statement. This is the simplest version here that we can have. Okay, so now we still see good morning because it's 11:37 a.m., But what if we passed in a different hour here? What if instead of passing the current hour, I passed in 13? 13 represents 1 p.m. It's 1 p.m. in military time. Okay, look at this. Now we get here good evening. Okay, so this tells me we have to fix something if we're getting here 13. Okay, yes, it's because our evening start should not be 5. Our evening start should be 17. It should be 5 p.m. in military time. Okay, there we go. So our evening start has to be in military time. It has to be 17 because we're checking if the hour is greater than or equal to 12 and the hour is less than 17. Okay, and we passed in 13, 1 p.m., so we see good afternoon. What if I passed in 19? Now I see good evening. What if I passed in 17? Now I still see good evening. What if I passed in 0? I see good evening because it's midnight. What if I pass in 1? This represents 1 a.m., so I see good morning. If I pass in 13, that represents 1 p.m., so I see good afternoon. Then I can just pass back in my current hour and I see good morning because it's currently 11 a.m. Okay, so that is a test of our different conditions. You want to test your code where possible and often to make sure you didn't miss anything. It's very easy to miss things like we just saw. It's easy to miss some portion of code, do something incorrectly. So testing out your code is very useful for you because you'll be able to find where you went wrong if you test out different cases like we just did. We tested out different hours. We tested out 0. We tested out 13 different hours to be able to see if we made a mistake anywhere. All right, so look at that. Now we have a different greeting based on the current hour that it is. We have good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Awesome. Now we can also show a different image in the app depending on is it morning, afternoon, or evening. So join me in our next lecture where we will learn how to show a different picture depending on is it morning, afternoon, or evening. Hello everyone and welcome back to our course. In this lecture, we're going to learn how to show a different icon depending on what time of day it is. So we're going to start off by looking at how we can add an icon to the app, and then we'll look at how we can use if statements to display a certain icon. Later on in the course, we'll also do images as well. Okay, so here to add an icon, let's go into our content view and add a new element into the vertical stack. An icon is a form of image, and here you can pass in a system name for the image. And instead of choosing something like, for example, an image that you uploaded into the project, you can just return the name of an icon like moon, and this is in the form of a string. So now, if you wait a moment, you can actually see a moon icon will appear in the app. Okay, and this is known as an SF symbol, which comes with Xcode. And if you want to see all of the available symbols, then go to the webpage developer.apple.com/sf-symbols. Here, this is the official documentation for SF Symbols 3. These symbols are available for iOS, iPad, macOS, tvOS, and watchOS. And you can download an application called SF Symbols 3. And this actually will allow you to see all of the available symbols. So I've actually downloaded that, and I now have the SF Symbols app on my computer. This is what it looks like. You can see on the left-hand side all of the categories of symbols. There's a lot of symbols that you can use, and they all look great. We're going to be using symbols under the weather category because those are good for greetings like time of day. You can have a sunrise, you can have a sun, a sunset, a moon, and more. So there's tons of symbols. I definitely recommend this SF Symbols application. Now, in the next lecture, we are going to learn how we can display multiple icons. So currently we're just displaying a moon, and you can see how easy it is to use an SF symbol. Here we're using the SF symbol for the moon. But coming up next, we're going to learn how we can choose a different symbol depending on what time of day it is. We'll show a moon, we'll show a sun and horizon, we'll show a sun, and we'll show a sunset. So we can show different images, in this case an image icon, depending on what time of day it is. So I will see you in the next lecture. Hello everyone and welcome back to our course. In our previous lecture, we learned how to show an image icon using an SF symbol for a moon. In this lecture, we're going to learn how we can show the image icon conditionally. So we can show a different icon depending on the time of day. It will be very similar to what we did for choose greeting, but we're going to have slightly different cases just for more practice of working with conditions in Swift. So here, currently I have my system name being moon, but instead I'm going to use a function choose icon where I pass in an hour and I'm going to send the current hour to the function. So I am going to have to create a function called choose icon for this to work. So somewhere inside of our file, let's create a function called choose icon, which takes in an hour as an integer. It's going to return a string because, as we saw, to create an app in-app icon, an image icon, we are going to have to pass in a string. So here we could already return moon, and we'll be able to see our moon back here inside of the app if we just wait for this to recompile and we refresh the preview. We'll be able to see our moon icon will be added in, this time via a function called choose icon, which will display an icon based on the current hour. Currently, we're just going to show the moon as the icon. Okay, there we go. But let's change this up to show something else. Let's show the moon only if it is currently nighttime. So here I am going to create a constant for midnight, and I'm going to check if the hour is greater than midnight. Then I am going to return moon. Now I will also need some case for if it is not midnight, so in that case I could return sun. Okay, so if the current hour is greater than midnight, we will display the moon. Now midnight is represented as 0, so let's give that variable the value 0. Okay, then we'll be able to see currently the hour is 12, which is greater than 0, so we see the moon. But we also want to check if the hour is less than the time that sunrise starts. So we're going to create another constant called sunrise starts. We'll set this to 5, so that represents 5 a.m. in military time. If the hour is greater than midnight and the hour is less than sunrise starts, we'll return the moon because that means it's nighttime. Otherwise, we'll return something else. Right now, we're returning the sun. Now, for the sun, this actually is not a real SF symbol. So let's open our SF symbols app, and you'll see we don't actually have anything here called sun. You can search for the sun in the search bar, but there's nothing that's actually called sun. You have to use these exact names, like you have to use sun.min or sun.max. You can't use just sun. So I am going to choose, let's choose sun. So back in Xcode here, I will use sun.max, okay, as our alternative. Now we see a sun. Why do we see a sun icon? Well, because the current hour is 12, which means that it is, yes, it is greater than midnight, but it's not less than sunrise starts. So we return sun.max instead. Let's display a sunrise if it's currently between 5 and 8. So I'll use an else if statement to have another case. I'm going to check if the hour is greater than or equal to sunrise starts, and if the hour is less than sunrise ends. That means it's currently sunrise, and I'll have a generous time for sunrise, so I'll create a constant called sunrise ends, which will be 8 a.m. If that is the case, then let's go into our SF symbols app, and here we can choose something like, we can choose a sun and horizon, we can choose sunrise, we can choose sun.fill. Let's choose sun and horizon. That one is pretty. So I'm going to go into my Xcode app and I'm going to return here sun.and.horizon. That is the exact name here for my icon. If I want to see the preview of that, I have to pass in an hour that lands between sunrise. So we could do 6. Now, look at that. We now see the sunrise inside of our preview because the first if statement passed as false. So we went to the next if statement in the chain, which passed as true. Okay, now what if it is just during the day? What if it's not here night and it's not sunrise. Let's have another condition for that. I'll use an else if statement here. I'm going to check if the hour is greater than or equal to sunrise ends and the hour is less than evening start. So we will create here a constant called evening start and we'll set that to equal 5. In that case, let's open the body of the if statement, and if the if statement's condition passes as true, let's return sun.max. Okay, so that means that the hour has to be greater than or equal to 8 and the hour must be less than or equal to 17. So actually make sure you make this 17, not 5, because we're using military time here. So we go from 0 to 24 instead of 0 to 12. Okay, now we can pass in the current hour because the current hour is 12. And now look at that, we see the sun. Now, what if here we have something else? Well, let's pass in here sunset. That is going to be the case of if it's not night and it's not sunrise and it's not sun, then it should be sunset. It's the remaining case. And you can see inside of SF symbols that we indeed do have sunset. That is what it looks like. So we can preview that by going into our project. And here, instead of passing the current hour as the hour, we can pass in something that lands at sunset, which would be around 18, which means 6 p.m. And look at that. Now we have the icon for sunset. So we can test all the hours. We have hour 0, which would give us here a moon for nighttime. Let's just wait for that to update. If we have hour 0 here, that should be indeed a moon. Okay, let's see. Why would it give me instead? Oh, yes. Okay, so we actually have to change this to if the hour is greater than or equal to midnight, then we should use a moon. There we go. So let's change that in that function, and we can also change it in our other function here. For choosing a greeting, we could also set that to be greater than or equal to midnight. Okay, and here we are displaying a moon. Okay, let's test all the hours. We can test 0, then we can test 1, and we can test 2, we can test 3, we can test 4, we can test 5, at which point we start to see sun and horizon. We can test 6, and let's test 7, and 8. Okay, at 8 we get the sun. Then we have 9. Okay, there's 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, then we go to 13 because we're using military time. And 14, 15, 16, 17. We have 18. Now at 18, so at 17, yes, at 17 even, we get the start of the sun set. Okay, so we're giving a generous time for sunset. At 17 and then at 18, at 19 we have the sunset. Then at 20 we have the sunset. 21 we have the sunset. 22 we have the sunset. 23 we have the sunset. 24 we then, well, that's already going to be 0, so that's going to be back at night. Okay, so that is working fine. You could, of course, add more cases, be more specific about what you want to display at exactly what time, but this is a great starting point for displaying an icon depending on the time. So you have a relevant icon for the current time. So currently it's 12:19 p.m., so I see good afternoon and I see a sun. Awesome. Okay, so that is how you can build out a simple greeting app using Swiftui. You can also test this out on your actual phone if you do connect your phone, and then it will appear here. You can choose that instead of using a simulator for the preview. You can also run the app at the top right-hand corner by pressing run to actually be able to see it on your device, whether that is your actual phone or the simulator, which I am using in this case. You just have to press that run button, and then you can track the progress here. Currently I'm building 22 out of 36, then waiting for my simulator to start, and now it's launching. And then just give it a moment to launch. It will take a long time to launch the first time, but after that it will be faster. It also helps to leave the simulator open. Don't close the simulator completely, like don't quit the application, keep the application open. You can close the actual window, but keep the application itself open. Then here we can see the app in the simulator Congratulations everyone. In this project, you learned how to build a new iOS app. You learned how to show the current time, how to get the current hour in military time, how to display a greeting based on the current hour, how to get the SF Symbols app to see all of the available icons for you built into Xcode, and how to show an icon depending on a certain condition.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching this course. If you want to watch the rest of the course, the link is down below. Not only will you get the access to this course, but you'll get access to a lot of other courses in a huge bundle, and it's on sale today. So buy before the sale ends. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another video.